Learn English through story. The forbidden whisper of love. In the quiet town of Valeria, nestled between rolling hills and thick forests, the passage of time was marked by the gentle ticking of an ancient clock perched on the tower in the town square. Valeria was a town where secrets were tightly held, where whispers carried more weight than conversations, and where love, in its many forms, was both celebrated and feared. It was a place bound by tradition and unspoken rule as an invisible code that shaped every interaction, especially when it came to matters of the heart. At the center of this web of traditions and whispered rules was an age-old tale known only to the elders, a legend passed down in secret, one that carried a warning about love and its forbidden forms. The story was seldom told, for fear of stirring curiosity, and those who knew it never spoke of it unless compelled by a grave sense of duty. It was the tale of the forbidden whisper, a love so pure, yet so dangerous, that it could unravel the very fabric of a person's life. This whisper, it was said, could only be heard once, in a fleeting moment, when two souls recognized each other in a way that transcended words, reason, or even time itself. But the whisper was cursed. To act on it, to speak of it aloud, was to invite ruin. One autumn evening, a man named Samuel came to Valeria. He was an outsider, a traveler from a distant city who sought solace in the quiet life the town promised. His arrival was unremarkable. There were no grand entrances, no introductions, no lingering stares from the townsfolk. In fact, Samuel preferred it that way. He had come to Valeria to escape, though he rarely spoke of what he was fleeing from. The scars on his heart were still too fresh. At 35, Samuel was a man of few words. His deep brown eyes often reflected the weight of unspoken stories, and his rugged appearance hinted at a life lived on the road. He had once known love, or so he thought. It had left him shattered, leaving behind a hollow space in his chest that no amount of distance or time could seem to heal. In Valeria, he rented a small cottage at the edge of the forest, where he could be alone with his thoughts. He spent his days in solitude, walking through the woods, working odd jobs around town, and visiting the town's only tavern in the evenings. It was here that he first heard whispers of her. Her name was Ilara. Ilara was a woman of quiet grace, a painter known for her depictions of the forest that surrounded Valeria. Her art captured something mystical, something alive, in the trees and streams that seemed to breathe on the canvas. Her presence was felt in the town long before she ever appeared in person. Her name was spoken in hushed tones, as if uttering it too loudly might summon her, or worse, provoke some ancient force. Samuel first saw Ilara on a misty morning, as he walked along the edge of the forest. She was standing by a stream, her easel set up, her brush gliding over the canvas with effortless precision. Her long dark hair cascaded down her back, and her pale skin seemed to glow in the dim light. She was beautiful, but not in a way that was easy to describe. It was her presence, yet an air of mystery, a quiet strength that drew Samuel in. He stood watching her for a moment, captivated by her focus, the way she seemed to merge with the landscape she was painting. There was something about her that stirred a memory deep within him, a feeling he thought he had long buried. But he shook it off and continued his walk, not daring to disturb her. Days passed, and Samuel found himself drawn to the spot by the stream more frequently. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was the peace he found there, or perhaps it was the hope of seeing her again. He never approached her, though he simply watched from a distance, content to remain a ghost in her world. It wasn't until one evening, in the tavern, that their paths crossed. Samuel had taken his usual seat at the far end of the bar, nursing a drink and listening to the murmurs of the townsfolk. It was then that she walked in, her presence commanding attention without a single word. The room seemed to still for a moment as she made her way to the bar, her movements fluid and deliberate. Alara ordered a drink, and as she turned to leave, her eyes met Samuel's. For a brief moment, something passed between them, a recognition, a flicker of something long forgotten. It was as if time itself had paused, and in that instant, Samuel heard it, a whisper. It was soft, barely audible, but it was there. A single word, carried on the air between them, love. Samuel's heart raced. He wasn't sure if he had imagined it, but the look in Alari's eyes told him otherwise. She had heard it too. Without a word, she turned and walked out of the tavern, leaving Samuel frozen in place, his mind reeling. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. The whisper haunted him, echoing in his mind, pulling at the deepest parts of his soul. He knew the stories, the warnings. He had heard the old men in the tavern speak of the forbidden whisper, but he had always dismissed it as folklore, a tale to keep people in line. But now, having heard it himself, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was real. The days that followed were a blur of confusion and longing. Samuel found himself wandering the forest, searching for Alara. Though he wasn't sure what he would say if he found her, he was consumed by the whisper, the word that had passed between them, the word that held the weight of something far greater than either of them could understand. Finally, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in a golden glow, Samuel found her. She was standing by the stream again, her easel set aside, staring into the water. He approached her slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. Alara, he called softly. She turned to him, her eyes sad, yet knowing. She didn't speak, but the silence between them was heavy with meaning. You heard it, didn't you? Samuel asked, though he already knew the answer. Alara nodded. Yes, she whispered, I heard it. Samuel took a step closer, his voice trembling. What does it mean? Alara sighed, turning her gaze back to the stream. It means we're bound, Samuel. The whisper is not something we can ignore. It's ancient, older than this town, older than time itself. When two souls hear it, they are drawn together. But to act on it a broken bar, to give into it a broken bar. She trailed off, her voice faltering. To give into it would be to invite ruin. Samuel finished for her. Alara nodded again. Yes, that is the curse. The whisper is a promise, but it is also a warning. Love, in its truest form, is forbidden. It's too powerful, too dangerous. It consumes everything in its path. Samuel's heart ached at her words. He had felt love before, but never like this. This was different. This was a love that transcended everything he had ever known. A love that felt like it had been waiting for him his entire life. And yet, it was a love he could never have. What do we do? Samuel asked, his voice barely a whisper. Alara shook her head. There is nothing we can do. The whisper has spoken, and now we must live with it. For a long time, they stood in silence, the weight of their shared fate hanging between them. Samuel wanted to reach out, to take her hand, to hold her close and never let go, but he knew that to do so would be to seal their doom. In the days that followed, Samuel and Alara continued to see each other, but always from a distance. They never spoke of the whisper again, but it lingered between them, a silent force that bound them together yet kept them apart. As time passed, Samuel found it harder and harder to resist the pull of the whisper. He dreamed of Alara every night, her face haunting him, her voice calling to him. He couldn't escape the feeling that they were meant to be together, that the whisper was not a curse, but a gift. One night, driven by a force he could no longer control, Samuel went to Alara's cottage. The moon was high in the sky, casting a pale light over the town as he made his way through the dark streets. When he reached her door, he hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. Then, with a deep breath, he knocked. Alara opened the door, her eyes wide with surprise. "Samuel," she whispered. Without a word, Samuel stepped inside and took her in his arms. For a moment, they stood there, holding each other, the weight of the forbidden love between them heavy, yet undeniable. Finally, Samuel pulled back and looked into her eyes. "I can't fight it anymore," he whispered. "I love you, Alara. I don't care about the curse, or the warnings, or the consequences. I love you, and I can't live without you." Tears welled in Alara's eyes as she looked up at him. "I love you too, Samuel," she whispered, with a broken bar. Before she could finish, Samuel kissed her, and in that moment, the world around them seemed to disappear. All that mattered was the love they shared, the love that had been whispered to them on that fateful night in the tavern. For a brief moment, they were free from the curse, free from the warnings, free from the weight of the forbidden whisper. But it was only a moment. As they pulled away from each other, the ground beneath them began to tremble, the air grew thick, and the world around them seemed to shift, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling. Alara's eyes widened in fear. "Samuel, what have we done?" Before Samuel could answer, a deafening crack filled the air, and the ground beneath them split open. Darkness poured out, swirling around them, pulling them apart. Samuel reached out for Alara, but it was too late. The curse had been set in motion, and there was no stopping it now. In the end, the whisper had been right. Love, in its truest form, was forbidden, and those who dared to act on it were doomed to suffer the consequences. As Samuel was swallowed by the darkness, his last thought was of Alara, and the love they had shared, however brief it had been. For some loves, even the briefest moment was worth the price. I hope you enjoyed the story. If you enjoyed, then please like and share this video, and don't forget to subscribe our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.